Hello and welcome to a special Riverfront U college football preview episode. I'm so pleased to bring in from College Football Focus, Mike Wachsman. Mike, thanks so much for joining me.
You are very welcome, Seth. How have you been doing?
Oh, it's been a busy summer. I've got young children, so I am a good taxi driver. I'll tell you that.
There you go.
Hey, so we'll do more at the end, but tell me a little bit about your publication. I think that's dropping maybe even today as we record on July 1st. What is it and where can people get it?
Yeah, for years I've actually wanted to put something together to kind of not necessarily rival the Athlons and the Lindys and the Phil Steeles that you see out there, but um, anyone who knows me knows that I've always had a lot of opinions, especially as they pertain to college football. So I kind of wanted to get my opinions out there but kind of come from a place of research and knowledge. So for years I tried it. For whatever reason, it didn't work. This year I finally was able to collaborate with a few guys who had worked at SEC Unfiltered and a website called cfbpod.com. One guy handled the graphics, a couple other guys were doing some of the writing, and we collaborated. And today, our first ever publication dropped. So it is 335 pages. It previews every Power Four team. We also have conference overviews of all of the G5, and we have college football playoff preview predictions. And so it pretty much, we wanted to go a little bit later so we could get the roster moves and the portal additions up to date, because that's the main problem that you see with these ones that drop early. By the time they hit the newsstand, a lot of these things are obsolete. So we wanted to try to get as many of the portal moves in as we could. It dropped today. It is $12. If someone wants to pick that up, they can go to cfbpod.com, and there is a link there to order. And right when you order, it'll give you the option to download, and you can start reading. It is a digital publication.
Okay, that's awesome. That is great. I was going to ask that because when I first saw it, I wondered, is this something we're shipping or is it downloadable? That's great. That's going to be that's going to be a treasure trove for a lot of folks. And we will, at the end of the episode here, we'll talk more about it. Let's dig into college football. This is a year of change. I mean, tangentially, we've got the NCAA EA sports game coming out again for the first time in over 10 years. So you've got that, but then you've also got all this change with the playoff and expanding from 4 to 12, and then even expansion within the conferences. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts of this summer leading into college football. Uh-oh, I have lost Mike. Well, as he tries to hopefully get back on here, if we think about this fact, we've got unprecedented movement in the conferences. You've got Pacific Coast Conference teams coming to the Big Ten and to the okay, Mike says he has an internet surge. Okay, we're going to put a pause on this. Okay, we are back. Mike had an internet surge and lost connection there momentarily. Mike, I was starting to broach the subject of all the change. I mean, we could go down many lists, including just the NCAA football coming back on the video game, but that's kind of off to the side. You've got conference realignment in full effect yet again. You've got conferences deciding to go away from the division aspect, and that's going to create quite a change, especially in the Big Ten, where you could see Ohio State play Michigan even 3 times in a year at this point now. And then you've also got the playoff going from 4 to 12 teams. Throw in there NIL ever growing and some of the changes in Congress and within the NCAA with some decisions being handed down judicially. What do you think about all this change, and how are we going to survive as fans, let alone the structure itself?
Well, I mean, we'll find a way to survive. There's been changes going back to the 1940s, 50s, 60s,
Yep.
and people just had to adapt. The game adapted, and people have to adapt with it. As far as the specific things you mentioned, I actually think the most dangerous of that bunch. I don't have a problem with NIL. I don't think a lot of it has been used the way it was intended, but I do think that players could be able to get something for their trouble. I mean, a scholarship is fine, but if you're going out with your friends on a Friday night to get a pizza, you can't show the pizza place your scholarship and say, okay, I'm going to pay for this if you got
Mhm.
no money. So NIL is fine. Transfer is fine within limits. I don't like the unlimited transfer rule. I think that is kind of a problem. It's basically unfettered free agency. You don't play for a year, just go somewhere else. There are some guys this year on their sixth school in
Yeah.
6 years. So I don't think that's great. The realignment, it's interesting. I don't know if it is necessarily great. I know in the every Power Four conference had at least one move. The ACC is taking on Cal and Stanford and SMU,
Mhm.
and it's still odd. Cal and Stanford, West Coast teams in the
Yeah.
Atlantic Coast Conference. That's diametrically opposed to what the Atlantic Coast is. The Big 12 is adding some of the Pac 12 holdovers or refugees. Big 10, of course, has Oregon and Washington and USC and UCLA. And then the SEC has Texas and Oklahoma. So I think realignment, I don't think it's done. I think the end game is going to be the SEC and Big 10 flexing their muscle over everybody else. And they are probably going to be about 24 teams each. They may even break off and hold their own playoff because that's where the money is. That's where the
Mhm.
power structure is going to be. They have the biggest TV contracts, they have the biggest brands. And it wouldn't shock me if they kind of make almost an NFL junior type model where
Yeah.
all of the best players go there. I don't think that is a good portent for college football. I think some of the charm is the regionality, the rivalries, the things that set it apart from the NFL. You've got teams like Army and Navy that run the option. You've got a lot of teams that still kind of run air raid. NFL games, to me, almost all the teams, even though they run schematically different things, NFL games look the same if you turn them on Sunday. A lot of the same sets, a lot of the same stuff. College, you can go from week to week and you can see 4, 5, 6 different offenses, defenses having to adapt to it. And that's what I like about college football. So I don't think some of this isn't bad. Some of it, I think, is going to, for this season, certainly have an impact. But I think down the road, the bigger impact is coming as realignment, I don't think is finished. And I don't think playoff expansion is finished either. And that's also something I've always said that if something is harder to get into, then it's more special. I
Mm.
didn't have a problem with the BCS. I had a problem sometimes with the methodology. I think more humans on a committee kind of make things worse. If they could just kind of go to a computer based or analytics based or just something that is numbers based that shows your achievement and your team strength and all that, I think ultimately that would be the best way to do things. But the BCS usually didn't get it wrong. I don't think the CFP, they might have had one selection in all of their years that people could really quibble about. 12 teams, sure, access is great, but I think it should be about teams that have a shot to win it. And I think about 9 of these teams aren't really going to have a realistic shot every year. So we're going to get more blowouts, and you're going to see most of these same teams you've seen, the Alabamas, the Ohio States, the Georgias, in the semifinals and the finals.
I agree with that. And I'll tell you, you used the word charm a few minutes ago. And as an Ohio State grad and fan, I put that out there first. And I understand Ohio State, even if it was an 8 team, not even all the way to 12, Ohio State would have made every 8-team playoff from 2014 to now had they had 8 instead of 4. So from my standpoint, part of me says, well, wouldn't I want to be in the dance every year? Well, yeah, that'd be fun, I suppose, except even going back before the BCS, part of the thing that made college football was you could trip up and maybe your season's over. And I know people don't like that, but to me, it was that tightrope walk from late August, early September, all the way through the end of November that is to me, that's fun. It's the only sport in North America or in the United States that had that kind of atmosphere, that English Premier League type feeling. And we're taking that away because, again, Ohio State would have made every playoff if it was 8 or 12 since 2014. And you and I can say with complete honesty that there were a few years there where Ohio State would not have won a national title, even given the chance. So to me, the charm of college football still has always been, and I say that as someone who's had a dog in the fight almost his whole life with Ohio State being my favorite team. I understand that, and I understand there's Purdue's and Indiana's and teams like that out there that maybe could never have gotten in that spot. But boy, that to me, we're taking away the charm. And I know people argue against the thought that, well, games will still mean something. Okay, maybe, but which Ohio State Michigan matchup will mean what we remember most, like the way
Right.
the last Saturday in November, the next week when they play in the semifinal or the final. Like, which one am I supposed to get up more for? I don't know.
Right. Well, and the way I've kind of described it is, yes, more games will mean something, but fewer games will mean everything. If you remember a few years ago when Ohio State played Penn State, when they had Saquon Barkley, they came in as number 2. Ohio State came in as number 6. That game had all kinds of buzz in the stadium, drama leading up to the week. And this year's system, loser is like, okay, we can kind of come back. You really felt like your back was against a wall after you lost that game. And when JT Barrett made that last touchdown pass, Ohio State really felt like it accomplished something. And Penn State is going, man, that could have been our season. And I'm with you. I think that there is something kind of magical about that. I mean, you go back to 2014, Ohio State loses to Virginia Tech early. Now, it was early and they had a chance to rebound, but they wouldn't have been in if they lost another game. And so I think that it focuses teams. And I think if you're seeing 2 teams with 1 loss, one of them is out. All the stakes in the world are on that game. Now you got 2 teams with 1 loss. Maybe both of them make it. And so it's a big game, but it's not a mammoth game. And so I think it's going to be a detriment to the mammoth stakes games, but it will have more teams involved in November because there will be more teams vying for more spots.
One of the things, we do a lot of Reds content here at the Riverfront, and one of the things that we've observed as Major League Baseball has expanded their playoffs is more owners seem content or maybe they're given a hall pass to shoot for the 500 level team. We're going to have a team that's around 81 and 81 and still possibly make the playoffs. They're content to say we got in the playoffs versus if it's harder and harder, you've got to reach much higher and maybe get that extra free agent pitcher or that extra bat in the lineup. And I could see that here as well. And certainly your Penn States of the world that haven't made a playoff in the 4-team realm or a BCS championship game going back further, they're going to be able to have that chance now more often. But again, for me, I like the tightrope type scenario. Let's talk a little bit about some of these local teams, local to us anyway. Again, you've got the preview guide that just dropped today. We'll talk a little more about that at the end and how people can read up on these teams. But University of Cincinnati, we'll start, as close as possible to the Riverfront. Boy, tough year replacing Luke Fickell last year, 3-9, 1-8 in their first try in the Big 12. And now they get the news that star defensive lineman Dante Corleone is going to be out. That just dropped last week as we record here on July 1st. What do you see out of UC coming up this year?
Unfortunately, I think it's going to be a fairly long year. Certainly the new teams coming into the league, the Arizonas and the Utah especially, that makes the league even more top-heavy because those are 2 pretty good teams. I think Cincinnati, before these teams came in, maybe could have been a legitimate contender for middle of the pack, 500-ish sort of finish. If they're without Corleone for any extended stretch of time, then that's really going to have an impact. The offense could be okay. I mean, hometown product Corey Kiner running the ball. I know that he went to LSU for a little bit, found that maybe home was calling him again, so he came back. They got a transfer quarterback in Brendan Sorsby from Indiana. So I think the offense will be okay. Luke Kandra is an All-American type up front on the offensive line. I know that folks were a little kind of ambivalent about Scott Satterfield. He didn't do great at Louisville. He was pretty decent, though, at the G5 level. And Cincinnati, for the longest time, was a G5 team. Now they're in with bigger fish. So I think that their ceiling, is 500, and they could make a bowl with some breaks. If Corleone is back and maybe only misses a game or 2, then I think that's a pretty realistic expectation. But if he misses half the season, or heaven forbid, even longer, they might be looking at like a 3 or 4 win campaign.
Well, and he's that good. And
Yes.
to get it out there officially, the release came out late last week. It said Cincinnati football star defensive lineman Dante Corleone is out indefinitely after suffering from a non-football illness. So obviously, you wish the best for him. He's an NFL prospect, and certainly if he can come back, that'll help things immensely. Big 12, you mentioned you're getting Utah and Arizona coming in, and certainly you're right. When Texas and Oklahoma were set to be gone, and then they added the new teams, Central Florida, I believe, BYU, Cincinnati. You think about that, and you're like, oh, this is a winnable league possibly for the UC that certainly Luke Fickell was coaching for those years. What do you think of the Big 12, though? They're kind of on that cusp, though, aren't they? It was what we talked about earlier of the Big 10 and the SEC kind of running the roost quite a bit.
Yeah, I think they're in the same sort of battle as the ACC. They're going for visibility. They need to hope that Utah is very good. They need
Mm-hmm.
to hope that Arizona is good. Kansas State is good, but doesn't move anybody's needle.
Right.
Kansas would be a nice story because they've been so downtrodden for so many years, and Lance Leipold has done some really nice things with them. So the fact that Kansas could be good, that would be a little bit of a story. But again, does Kansas really move the meter? Oklahoma State, Mike Gundy's been there forever. This might be one of his best teams. They might be the most prominent team in the league because they've been good a few times, even when Texas and Oklahoma were kind of ruling the roost. But I think eventually, when and if these leagues do disintegrate, I think you're going to see the best teams from the Big 12 and the best teams from the ACC end up with landing spots in the SEC and the Big 10. And
I
the
agree.
others might need to go the way of what Oregon State and Washington State did, maybe sort of an independent pseudo Mountain West or pseudo group of five sort of setup where they're playing FBS football, but it's at a lower level. So I think the Big 12 and ACC will kind of fight for the best of the also ran conferences, well behind the SEC and the Big 10.
Well, and in NCAA basketball parlance, we could be talking about 2 one-bid leagues, right? I mean,
Yes.
when it comes to the 12 team, and we actually let's bring that up a little bit because there's 12 teams in the playoff, but they're going to have a minimum of one group of 5 team. Right. Not Notre Dame. Notre Dame is considered in the bigger group. So a minimum of one group of 5 teams. So you're talking about 11 schools, but the top 4 are based on Big 10, SEC, Big 12, and ACC title champions. So those 4 seeds, even if you're a 3-loss team, you could be a top 4 seed. I heard Andy Staples speak recently about how that 5th seed actually is kind of the catbird seat because you get to host a game and you get to play a neutral site game against maybe a 2 or 3 or 4-loss team and a Big 12 or ACC champ. And then, of course, you got to run into the number 1 seed possibly the next week. But it's all pretty interesting.
It is. I actually think the 5 and the 6 are in pretty good position because you're playing the lowest seeds. The 5 is probably going to play the group of 5 team, Liberty, Boise State, Memphis, whoever it is. And in theory, that 5 is going to be a second place team from the SEC or the Big 10.
Right.
So they should be really good and boat race them the way that Oregon did.
Did I lose you again, Mike? Okay, we're going to take another pause. Okay, technical difficulties yet again, but we're back on, and we were just discussing the idea that 5th seed, and even you're right, the 6th seed, because I think it's key. You get the home game against a lesser opponent by record and distinction, but then also when you have to play up a little bit in theory, because you're playing a league champ that might not even be as good as you get to play them on a neutral site.
And that was my main point, was you're going to be playing and maybe, I mean, Clemson's good and Florida State's good and Utah's good, but compared to, say, a Georgia or an Alabama or an Ohio State or a Michigan being in that 5 or 6 hole, I think those teams could be underdogs to the 5 or the 6. And so, yeah, having the home game, against the low seed and then playing a team that is a better seed than you, but who you ostensibly will be favored against in a bowl game at a neutral site game, I think that it opens things up. People are going to say, wow, this didn't go the way we thought.
Right.
Well, welcome to the land of unintended consequences.
Well, yes, and it'll either be something that becomes in the NCAA or in the college football playoffs mind as quirky and fun and something to talk about, or they'll decide, hey, this isn't working the way we had hoped. Because I got to wonder if they really thought that through, because you're right. I mean, Oregon, Ohio State could play for a second time, and whichever team loses could still only have like one loss, right? And then all of a sudden they're the 5th seed. And they get to host a group of 5 team automatically. Well, unless now that group of 5 team could be as high as a 6 or 7 seed too, in theory.
The problem is, though, you look at a team like Liberty, and the committee has always valued wins. I mean,
Right.
If you have a 0 in your loss column,
Exactly.
It seems that the strength of schedule hasn't really mattered very much. But it mattered last year I mean, Liberty was the highest ranked group of 5 team. Their schedule was ranked 130th out of everybody. And I think if you have an undefeated Liberty and a 1-loss Boise State who plays Oregon this year, or a 1-loss Memphis who plays a couple of SEC teams, I think one of those teams will leapfrog Liberty, because I think the committee is finally going to put some strength of schedule metrics and penalize teams that play really bad schedules that are not in a power league. But I hear people talking all the time, well, the NCAA tournament is just fine with all these like little teams and Cinderellas. Well, basketball is so fundamentally different as a sport than football is. You can get one hot guy, Steph Curry years ago with Davidson,
right?
Oakland this year. You can get one guy or 1 or 2 guys a great shooting night, and the better team has a bad shooting night, they're out. In football, over a 60-minute game, the stronger team is going to win 9 out of 10. And if the lower team can pull that upset, they don't have the roster depth or strength to win 3 games in a row against big teams. So I think that is where, when folks talk about Cinderella, it's going to be an 8-seed Alabama, an 8-seed Ohio State, like a 7-seed Georgia. That's your Cinderella in this setup.
Well, it's really, wasn't it 2017 Alabama had all those injuries, and then they got put in, and of course Ohio State had lost to Oklahoma and Purdue, or no, Oklahoma and Iowa that year, right?
Right.
And then they get in, but they're healthy now in January, so they win. So, but we will never see Alabama as a Cinderella, no matter how we want to put that. So, but the other interesting quirk, and you mentioned UC earlier. Those teams, the UCs of Luke Fickell that makes a playoff, the Central Florida that claimed a national championship when they went undefeated, those teams, even your Boise States back in the aughts, and even Utah, they've climbed up to larger status. They're not group of 5s anymore. And so your group of 5 teams, presumably going forward, unless Liberty can really, catch lightning in a bottle, and actually, then you're right, have the strength of schedule too. I don't think the fear of those teams is going to come around for quite some time.
Right. No, I agree 100%.
All right, we've talked about Cincinnati. Do you have a favorite in the Big 12? Yeah, Utah.
I really Utah is great. Kyle Whittingham is criminally underappreciated as a coach. I think year in and year out, they're always very good, and people never think that they can really get the job done. But I think Utah, they're one of my favorite teams to watch, because I just love Kyle Whittingham. He dresses like he doesn't care. He coaches like he doesn't care, and his team wins 10 or 11 games every year. So I like them, but I actually really like Arizona.
Yeah.
Even before the coaching change, when they had Jed Fish, I really liked them, but they couldn't have found a better kind of match for their system as Brent Brennan, who was an offensive guy at San Jose State, that they were able to keep Noah Fafita and Tet McMillan, their quarterback receiver tandem, from going into the portal. That's going to make that offense really, really dynamic. And the defense just has to be good. They don't have to be great. If the defense is good, I think Arizona could be a 10-win team, and they play Utah during the season. That will be probably round 1 of the Big 12. That could be a championship game preview. Certainly, Kansas State's going to have something to say about it, and Oklahoma State's going to have something to say about it. But I think Arizona and Utah are the two best teams in the league, and I'm leaning toward Arizona right now.
Well, and you take out the regional aspect of these conferences, and I know from experience, I don't know if you were there back in 2000. Try going to Tucson in September and see if that's people talk about elevation in Colorado. Go to Tucson in September and experience 112 degrees and see how that shocks the system, I guess, if you have to play a road game. Let's just go up the road. I'm going to kind of keep it geographically natured here. Miami went 11-3 last year. They were 7-1 in the MAC. Very good school, very good team last year. Can you tell me a little bit about them in the MAC this year?
Yeah, I think they are the favorite. They and Toledo, I think, are the two best teams in the MAC. The fact that they're getting Brett Gabbert back at quarterback is huge. He got nicked up and the offense stagnated a little bit, but their offense is not really where they're based. They're based defensively. They have difference makers at each of the three levels. Brian Ugwu is a very good defensive end. He can rush the passer. He's pretty solid against the run. They've got Matt Salopek and Ty Wise, maybe the best linebacking tandem in the league. And then they've got Ryan Strader in the secondary, who was on some freshman All-American teams last year. So their defense finished top 20 in all four of the major stats: scoring D, total D, rush, and pass. And I think you could see that again this season. What Chuck Martin has done is nothing short of amazing. He inherited an 0-12 team. And by 2016, he had them in a bowl game. And in the last 5 years, they are the best team in the MAC. They're 24-11, and they're consistently winning 7, 8, 9. Last year, obviously, they won 11. I think they could be a double-digit team again this year. And I think a few of these guys are going to play in the NFL. I think the offense could have been really good had Rashad Amos not transferred out. He was a running back who had 1,100 yards. He ended up transferring into a power league, but I think he was all set to maybe put up threaten some MAC records because he's really good. So I think Miami is the best team in the league, and Toledo will be right on their heels, and they get rid of divisions this year. So it's probably going to be them, the two best teams playing in the championship game. And that is one thing in the MAC, especially where there's been a real balance of power inequity. I think the champion has been like from Toledo's league, Toledo's side of the draw most years. And I think it's nice that you have like a different champion every year on the other side, but it hasn't always been the two best teams. So part of me says leagues that are getting rid of divisions are doing a service because you're guaranteeing the two best teams are going to play, and it'll help the fortunes of your college football playoff showdown. But I also think that it leads to less flukiness. If a 3-loss team in the West happens to upset like the 1-loss team, well, that 3-loss team under this system is they'll be in the mix for the bid. That's the one thing that people don't get is unless all of the group of 5 teams are equal 2-3 losses, one is going to stand out. But yeah, I don't like champions that have 3 losses being considered for like a major bowl. So
no, I hear you. And certainly if you're a Big Ten fan, you know the East-West discussion over the years. So and you look at Toledo, DeQuan Finn, who put up a great performance in Ohio Stadium a couple years ago. He transferred out and went to Baylor. So that's going to be a change for them. And did Ohio State play Miami when they had Amos? I seem to remember him running, or maybe I just watched back football last year and I saw him. He's a good back.
They play? I can't remember exactly the year they played. They played Ohio State in no, that was 2019. He was not there.
Right. That's too far ago.
Yeah,
that was the year where people kind of poo-pooed Ohio State's schedule, but all these teams they played in their conference championship game, including Florida. So was it Lane Kiffin's Florida
Atlantic
team, and then Miami and Wisconsin? They certainly played twice that year. So yeah, that was interesting. Okay, so let's go south of the river. We'll start with Kentucky. They're in the SEC. Mike Stoops has what some folks call the best job in college football because he's not expected maybe to win everything, but he does well enough. Last year, not quite as good. Maybe they were 7-6 and 3-5 in the SEC. What do you see out of them? They've been recruiting Ohio pretty well. They've kind of taken over that Mark D'Antonio and even maybe a little bit of what Luke Fickell was doing.
Yeah, they definitely have been mining Ohio for some talent, and also their transfers. They've got a few Ohio State guys. They've got Chip Trayanum is probably going to be their lead back. They've got a couple of linemen that are former Buckeyes. So Mike Stoops has done a really nice job. And you're right, being in the shadow of Big Blue basketball, if you can win 8 or 9 games, then you're fine. I mean, yeah, they'd go crazy if they won an SEC title, but if they're winning 8 and 9 games a year, maybe pulling an upset every now and then, the Kentucky football fans will be fine because basketball obviously rules there. Kentucky this year, they could be. I mean, they had some problems after Will Levis with the offense, but Brock Vandegrift, who's a transfer from Georgia, he comes in. He was a highly touted kid. I think the offense could be a little more pass-centered, although they did lose their coordinator, Liam Cohen, to the NFL. So I'll be interested to see how that goes. But they're like Miami. They hang their hat on defense. Mm-hmm. And they got Georgia linebacker Jamon Dumas-Johnson to come in. He was an All-American, and so he's really good. They've got a really nice secondary. Maxwell Hairston is one of the best corners in college football. So I think Kentucky, they're one of those teams that they usually punch above their weight. They'll knock off somebody they shouldn't knock off, but they'll also lose to somebody that they shouldn't lose to. Ultimately, they will probably be in the 7, 8, 9 win range.
I'll tell you, there's somebody who Florida especially, but even Georgia, and I'm assuming, if you're Oklahoma and Texas, you're entering the SEC. There was a time when Kentucky probably wasn't much of a worry, but now that's the kind of game that they do sneak up and at least cause problems for, right? I mean, and certainly the Big 12 had some of that when they were when Kansas State or someone like that would be good too, alongside Texas, Oklahoma. But the depth of talent in the SEC is going to be a bit of a shock, possibly to at least Oklahoma, especially this year. I guess Stoops-wise, what are your thoughts of him as a coach and kind of, like? I guess he lived under his brother's shadow for a while, but now he's the guy in college football, right? Mike is the lone Stoops as a head coach.
Yeah, well, he definitely. I mean, he's another one who you can kind of see Kentucky is molded in his identity. The Stoops family is a defensive-minded family, and Kentucky has for a while been a top 4 or 5 defense in the SEC. They're never going to dazzle you with their offense, but they're going to hit you. They're going to force turnovers. You're going to have to get in the mud with them to beat them. The lower the score, the happier they are. If they're playing a 17-13 game, they're thrilled. And so I think that he probably, if they could sign him to a lifetime contract, he'd be happy. I think the school backers would be happy because they know what they have in him. They're never going to be really bad. They may never be really good, but they're going to be closer to good than to really bad. So when you're a program like Kentucky or like Kansas, because their basketball is great, or North Carolina, you can get by winning 8 games a year and be perfectly fine. And the fan base is not going to be upset because you live in the shadow of basketball. So if he can do that and just stay out of the way, and they can win 7, 8, 9 games a year, he's fine.
Well, and he's an SEC coach, so he's got that going when he goes out and recruits. And as we mentioned, he from Ohio, he's recruited Ohio really well. He hasn't always come up right against Ohio State, but like I said, he's gotten some of those guys that maybe D'Antonio would have gotten to go to Michigan State or something like that. And D'Antonio proved you can certainly do really well with that. Let's go over to hated rival of UK, and that's Louisville. Louisville certainly lost Kenny Satterfield. Not Kenny. What?
God.
I always do that because Kenny Satterfield played basketball for Cincinnati, and now Scott's there.
He did.
Louisville brings in beloved son Jeff Brom. reminiscent a little bit of Roy Williams turning them down the first time, but then coming. And they had a great year last year, 10-4, 7-1 in the ACC, lost the ACC title game in a tight game. And obviously Florida State had a well-known injury there, but they lose that game. They lose to USC in the Holiday Bowl, but boy, year one was a pretty good one for Brom.
Yeah, it was. And I think that he is one who is kind of taking the Mel Tucker approach. He has really loaded up the roster with transfers. And some of them I think will be an improvement over what he had. Some are taking a little bit of a wait and see. I know at quarterback, they've got Tyler Shuck, who comes over from Texas Tech. His problem is he's perennially been hurt. If he can stay healthy, I think he can provide some pop at the quarterback position. He's also a decent runner. And Louisville's problem, though, has been coming up with opportune defensive stops. They're a solid defense, but when they're facing teams like Florida State in the championship game or like Clemson, who has better talent than they do, they don't make enough stops to be able to win the game. They do have a great pass rusher in Ashton Galati. He's going to be probably an All-American. And they've got Quincy Riley in the secondary. He is also very good. I think their linebackers could be a little bit of a question mark, but I think that Brom coming home, he knows that a lot of expected of him. He loves the school. He and his brother both played there.
Yep.
And so I think when you've got kind of a native son coaching you, he's as invested as some of the players are going to be, maybe more so. And not just because of the contract, but he doesn't want to see his school fall on hard times. So he's going to do what he can to keep Louisville in the spotlight. I think they're in the second tier of the ACC teams. I think Florida State and Clemson are the two best teams this year. NC State will be very good. And then I think Louisville is in that next group, maybe with Miami and maybe one other team, maybe in North Carolina. But I think Louisville is going to be good again. I'd be surprised if they're worse than an 8-win team.
Well, look, they get Notre Dame in that rotation. They do play newcomer SMU, who's not awful. They play Miami. They play Clemson, and they've got that annual game with Kentucky. So, and that's obviously not in the league, but they've got a bit of a challenging schedule once you get past the first 2 weeks of Austin Peay and Jacksonville State.
Yeah, their schedule is what I think kind of is going to keep them from really being contenders in the league. I think if their roster was a little bit deeper and a little more developed with some high school guys, I think that they could be right there nipping at Clemson's heels. But again, I think that Brom's still kind of in a feeling out process, and the turnover at quarterback. I think that whenever you have a first-year quarterback, doesn't matter how good he is, I think that you could have a few growing pains, at least early in the season. So if you've got a couple of your tougher games at the beginning of the year, you could drop them. And then by the end of the year, you could be really good because in theory, everyone should settle in. But I'm usually leery of a new quarterback on a team that, especially if he's surrounded by a lot of other younger guys. If he's surrounded by a bunch of experience, it's not quite as big of a transition. But that's what I worry about with Florida State. DJ Uyunglele has tons of experience, but all of his receiving weapons went to the NFL. Now, Mike Norvell has been a great quarterback coach. If he can get DJU to really kind of not drop off the way when Jordan Travis was playing, they had a great offense, then that'll be one of his best coaching jobs in a long time. But that's the one reason I take pause with Florida State, is because even though DJU has a ton of experience, doesn't have a lot around him. And I think that could be some growing pains early on. But the fortunate thing for them is they have Clemson at the end of September. So maybe they will find their footing by then. Notre Dame is like middle, closer to the end of the schedule. So if they get past those two, then they should be fine.
Yeah, well, they go to Notre Dame and they go to Clemson, and then later on they go to Kentucky. So that's going to be tough. Changing gears a little bit, we'll go ahead and let's be honest. The Cincinnati region has a lot of Notre Dame fans, including the Riverfront's own Tim Daniel, who I work with. He's been a Notre Dame guy his whole life. So talk about them a little bit, and the fact that They're still not in a conference, but they're considered a part of the big conferences group when it comes to getting them into the playoff or not. And again, I think they're pretty happy if they get that 5th seed, right? They have no chance to be a top 4 seed and get a bye,
Right.
but they'd be fine with it. Last year, a bit up and down. Certainly, they had the last second thing against Ohio State that maybe their season changes a little bit. But what do you see out of Coach Freeman and his team this year?
I think that he was kind of I don't want to say victim. I mean, Brian Kelly did. I don't love Brian Kelly as far as the optics, but
Yeah.
truth be told, Brian Kelly was a pretty good coach considering the academic restrictions that Notre Dame has. He had them in the CFP twice. They weren't competitive, but he had them in there the year of COVID. They played for the ACC championship against Clemson. So he had a pretty good program. Marcus Freeman, that first year was a bit of a hiccup year, but I think that he is slowly but surely finding his footing. They're doing a really good job recruiting. They're starting to get in on the battles for some 4- and 5-star guys. They're going head to head with Ohio State and Alabama and some of these, and they're getting some of them. And I think that if you can accumulate talent, you can win. And I think that the fact that they're going to have a veteran quarterback in Riley Leonard coming over from Duke, they're the counter to Florida State. They have some experience at receiver. They're young, but they all played last year. Where their problem is they don't have a lot of experience on the offensive line, but they're 2 years removed from being a Joe Moore Award team up front. Their offensive line is usually pretty good. So I worry less about a team that is perennially good in an area if it looks like they have some deficits. So they're playing their usual schedule. I mean, they're playing Florida State, they're playing Louisville, they're playing USC at the end of the year. But they also have some easy games.
Yeah.
And so as far as the not being in a conference, yeah, that's advantageous for them. They still get the TV money from NBC.
Right.
And if they have a good year, they're going to have a comfortable spot, 5 or 6. They can never be in the top 4, so they will never get a bye, but they could get a home game. Some people might value the home game more than the week off. So I don't know that there's a ton of incentive unless they see the ship pulling out with the SEC and the Big Ten and saying, we're going to get left behind if we don't join. I think that Notre Dame is perfectly content to stay as an independent in football. And until or unless their hand is really forced, I think they're going to stay independent.
Well, and I guess the one thing is the Big Ten is the point where the payouts are going to be astronomical from, and the SEC will too, but the payout from the Big Ten, they sign their contract later, is close to, if not around $100 million a year per school. Right. So, but Notre Dame will never get that, like, I don't think, by themselves, but what they can do is they keep all playoff or bowl revenue to themselves. They don't have to share that with the conference. And then you look at whether they have a chance to advance in the tournament / playoff even easier, even better. I think that's a tactical decision as well. And you're right. Like if these leagues get to be mega leagues, you look even at Ohio State, they only gave Ohio State the one rival or protected matchup, and that's Michigan. Partially, I think, because they want Ohio State on that stage playing the West Coast teams. They want them on that stage playing some of these other teams. And so you get to the mega conference and you tell me, well, you're not going to play Northwestern as much, or if Purdue's down in a given era or whatever, and you're going to play all these tougher games. And what are we going to get to if we get to 2 20-team conferences or even more, 24 ACC or SEC and Big Ten? Are we getting rid of non-conference games? And now you've got to play all these tougher games all year. Meanwhile, Notre Dame's playing Northern Illinois. They're playing at Purdue. They're playing Miami, Ohio. They're playing Stanford as usual. They're playing at Georgia Tech, and they play Navy. Okay. Some years,
I think what will happen in that scenario, I think if they are 20-team leagues or even 24, I actually think divisions will come back.
Yes.
And you might play 8. You'll play 8 in your league, maybe have 1 crossover game. And they may even go down to 2 non-league games and play 10 conference games, because with the SEC and the Big Ten being so strong, you'll get a measure of who's good if you play 9 conference games or 10 conference games. That's going to serve you better I mean, you could lose, but it also will reinforce your strength if
Yeah,
you beat or are close with another good team. Then if you're going out and playing like Marshall in a non-conference game, what is that going to do for you other than it'll get your third team guys some playing time in the third quarter? So I think that you could. I mean, it wasn't all that long ago in the 60s and 70s. You had two non-conference games, and you would just play 8 teams. And I think uniformity of non-conference games needs to be addressed because you've got a couple playing 9 and a couple playing 8, and that's kind of an unlevel playing field. So I think that that will be addressed. But yeah, if you expand to 20 or 24, you're going to go back to divisions, and then what will happen is you'll play the 8 or 9 in your division, maybe 1 or 2 crossover games, and then the 2 winners will play each other, and maybe both teams stay in the pool for
right.
for the playoff, and maybe a third team. Because I think in most years, the SEC and the Big Ten are going to get at least 3 in, maybe some years of 4.
That's right. Well, and so it could become a bit of a battle between coaches and ADs or slash the schools on one side versus we're doing this for the TV revenue. The networks want the best games on TV, and
Right.
therefore we need you to play these better games throughout your schedule. Whereas the coaches probably would say, no, I'd rather have a couple of those, at least
Yes.
a couple of those easier ones where you can get a look at your younger guys, but also maybe give guys a bit of a mental break week in and week out. Do you see Notre Dame as a playoff team in this coming year?
I actually do. I think their defense is going to be really good. They could have a top 20 defense. They have 2 of the best defensive backs in America, corner Benjamin Morrison and the Nagurski Award winner or the Thorpe Award winner last year, Xavier Watts at safety.
Yeah.
So their secondary is really good. It's going to be hard to throw on them. And then they've got 2 guys up front in Howard Cross and Riley Mills, 2 interior guys who are going to make life tough for opposing runners and quarterbacks. So I think Notre Dame really, they open with Texas A&M, which is not a picnic, but I think they're better than them. And then they play Florida State and USC. Those are their 3 toughest games. It's not inconceivable that they win all 3 of those and are unbeaten. Now, I don't realistically think that'll happen, but I think their floor is 9, and I think realistically they're at least a 10-2 team, maybe 11-1. So if they're 10-2, they're in easy.
Well, and they'll never play that extra 13th game that
Correct.
could be another loss and have to do that either. So that's another point to make. All right, let's round out our discussion here and talk a little Ohio State. It's an interesting topic down on the riverfront. Folks either love them or hate them down there, but Ohio State coming off a season that was another 11-2 year. The elephant in the room is these three consecutive losses to Michigan. But they retained so many players, and then they added 2 Alabama guys, which Julian Salan likely won't factor in this year, maybe as a quarterback. But Caleb Downs is already, maybe the best safety in the country. He comes from Alabama after his freshman year. Tell me a little bit about the personnel and kind of, I guess we know the ceiling for Ohio State's pretty high this year.
It is. They're going to come in as number 1 or 2 in the preseason by just about everybody, and I think that that's justified. There are very few places where 11-2 is going to be considered a disappointment. I think the biggest disappointment is who the 2 were.
That's true.
I mean, if they had lost to, say, Penn State and Missouri, I think this would be framed a lot differently than if they had lost to Michigan and Missouri. Missouri, they were just thoroughly uninterested in being in the game. You could tell by the way that the offensive line was blocking. Obviously, Devin Brown got hurt early. So that was never going to go well. But you're right. The Michigan lost 3rd time in a row. It was closer. It came down to the very end. So rather than the previous 2, which were over by about midway through the 4th quarter, this one had drama all the way through, but it still ended the same way. And I think Ryan Day knows this. That's why he went out and hired Chip Kelly to be his offensive coordinator. It's not often you see a sitting head coach at a power conference school take what many would consider a step down lateral move at best to become a coordinator, but he coached Ryan in college. He was his quarterback at New Hampshire. And I think there aren't any other people that he would do this for. And when Chip Kelly is just running an offense, it can be scary. Some of the stuff that he put up when he was at Oregon was just like video game sort of stuff. And he's got Will Howard, who is his prototype quarterback, who can run. He's not going to be CJ Stroud in throwing the ball, but he throws it well enough. Some people are going to look at Kansas State and look at his completion percentage. Kansas State was, I think, top 5 or 6 in drop passes last year. So he could have, instead of being 61%, he could be 65%, and it'd be a completely different discussion. What he does is he's a clutch player. He has a Big 12 championship under his belt. And in the red zone, you're not going to know what to do. With CJ Stroud, they were going to have him go back and either hand off or throw the ball. Will Howard could tuck it. He could throw it. He can do a lot of things. And he's a big dude, so he can take some hits. So Will Howard does not have to be great. He just has to be good and not make a lot of mistakes. Caleb Downs, what a great addition he was. Freshman All-American. Got some real All-American buzz. It's not often that a team like Ohio State can get a guy that decorated and that talented to be in a secondary that's already pretty good. Mm-hmm. And Jim Knowles, in year 3 of his systems, his best Oklahoma State team was in year 3. Now, OSU was a top 5 defense last year. I've seen a lot of things that people think they're going to be the best defense in America. I mean, you've got JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer on the edges. Tyleik Williams is probably a first-round draft pick inside. Linebacker's a bit of a question, but you've got some athletes there, and C.J. Hicks and Sonny Styles and Cody Simon, who played last year. And then that secondary with Denzel Burke's a first-round pick. Lathan Ransom should be back healthy. Davidson Igbinosun and Jordan Hancock. So you don't really see a bunch of holes on this team, and they've got the schedule to ease into anything because they're non-league. And I hate kind of dissing my school, but I don't love when teams play the Western Michigans and the Akrons and the Marshalls. Sure, they may end up being good. It's just a bad look from an optics standpoint. So It's not going to tell you anything about the team. You're going to win these games 45-7, and you're still not going to know a lot about your team heading into Big Ten play.
Well, the only thing you could hope, and I don't always want to emulate that school up north, Michigan, but they had a very similar schedule last year as far as weakness. You didn't know until they played Penn State and Ohio State very late in the season. What do we really have? Is this fool's gold or not? But the thing they did is they played so many guys, Michigan did.
Right.
So even if you look at all the attrition Michigan had from the draft choices and the folks that moved on and the coaching change and all that, they returned so many kids who had snaps last year. And so I guess as an Ohio State fan, maybe you hope that's what happens against Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall, and even you go first game of the Big Ten at Michigan State.
Yeah, well, I think that Coach Day has actually said it was such a help to get a guy like a Quinshon Judkins at running back because Travion Henderson, great as he is, has been not healthy in 2 of his 3 years. And the drop-off from Henderson to Judkins is almost nothing. Whereas if it was Henderson to, say, James Peoples, who is a talent but hasn't played, that is something you would have to worry about. And with the extended schedule, playing more games if you get into the CFP, you are going to need to play more guys. And I think he has said that especially at the skill positions, they want to have more of a rotation. I mean, how often did we see the 5th and 6th receivers last year? Hardly at all.
Right.
But I think you'll get to see the Brandon Innes's and the Mylan Grahams and the Jaden Ballards this year. Maybe not for a ton, but I bet they'll play a series.
Sure.
Where those will be your 3 receivers, and they'll give Egbuka and Tate and Jeremiah Smith a breather, and then you'll rotate in. I think it'll be the same on the defensive line and linebacker. I think the secondary is probably the only area you're not going to see a ton of rotation, but I think linebackers and defensive line on defense, and the skill guys on offense, you're going to see a lot of rotation.
Well, and I like the idea of, hey, in this game when we're still have starters on the field, take one of your younger guys or one of your guys that hasn't played much yet, put them in with the starters and see what happens with everybody around them, rather than let's wait till 11 minutes left in the game and go wholesale change. I think you can see, and a receiver, as far as like already earned, because like when Marvin Harrison got on campus, there was already guys, Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, who they've earned time, right? And Igbokwe has earned time. He'll be out there if he's healthy. But you're going to see freshmen, including the one big one. He's going to play quite a bit, I'd say. I guess, where do you, and it's tough sometimes if you're a fan or an alum or things like that, but I know you've taken this seriously in your whole career as far as analyzing and being really honest. Maybe sometimes we're overly honest when we're quote unquote journalists and we try to do that. But where do you see, if there could be a trip up happening with Ohio State, where do you see it happening?
I actually think that trip to Oregon is going to be tough. Oregon is the team that's coming into the league of all of the Pac-12 teams. They're the one that most resembles a Big Ten team in terms of roster. They've got some tough guys. They've got some dudes. They've got an offensive system that is conducive to this league. They got Dylan Gabriel, who has a ton of experience at quarterback, to come in from Oklahoma. They've got a great receiving tandem in Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson, and their defense is not going to get overwhelmed by a lot of people. I think 2-3 years down the road, when people are talking about Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, Oregon is going to be a team that is consistently in that mix because they're recruiting at a high level. And I think that Dan Lanning, being a young guy, I think he's kind of going through what Kirby Smart went through. He was living in the shadow of Nick Saban for a while, finally slayed the dragon, and now Georgia is the program that people aspire to in the SEC. And I think right now, Lanning is shooting for Ohio State, and if they can beat them in the regular season, then they'll probably rematch again in the championship game. And I think Ohio State could turn the tables because that is still, even though it's mid-season, it's early enough that some of the new guys may still be kind of learning on the job. But I think going to Oregon on October 12th would be the biggest trip up. Yeah, they do go to Penn State, but even though those games typically are competitive, James Franklin's had his problems against Penn State, against Ohio State, Michigan. So I don't think that Penn State offensively is geared to beat OSU. And then Michigan, they come in to Columbus this year. And you did mention their defense is still going to be lethal, really, really good. I do question the offense, at least early. Alex Orji is kind of more of a Denard Robinson type, a guy who's going to run, maybe throw. He's not going to be. J.J. McCarthy could throw. They just didn't have him have to. Exactly. I don't know that Alex Orji can throw. I know that Jack Tuttle can throw, but I don't know if he can run. So they're going to, I think, do some experimentation at quarterback. And maybe this is the year Donovan Edwards finally blossoms out of the shadow of Blake Corum. I mean, OSU fans know him. Certainly, he's been a thorn in their side, but the job is his, and he doesn't really have that established backup, which he was. So he's going to be in the spotlight. I still wonder who's going to catch passes because they don't have a super talented, outside of tight end Colston Loveland, they don't have a whole lot of difference makers out wide. So I think Michigan, they won't be bad, but I think they're going to take a step back or two. I think that they're probably just behind Oregon, maybe behind Penn State. I don't think they'll be worse than 9-3, but I don't think they win the Big Ten this year.
Well, you mentioned Edwards and even J.J. McCarthy. You know, part of the job that Ryan Day has is to choose talent, and it's been established that Ryan Day chose Kyle McCord, and that upset J.J. McCarthy, and he chose Travion Henderson, and Edwards wasn't happy about that, and it shows on the field sometimes. You mentioned the Oregon game. Ohio State has to play Iowa at home the week before, and I don't think that's a loss for Ohio State, but that's going to be a physical matchup against a good defense, certainly. And the next week you're traveling out to Eugene. So that enters in there too.
Yeah, it does. You always worry about a little bit of a look ahead, and I think that Iowa, because they've had so many problems offensively, I mean, they can't be any worse than they were offensively, but even better for them goes from what, 15 points to 20. So that's a jump, but it's not going to scare anyone. But their defense, they're going to make Ohio State work because their defense is really good. Um, and you're right, physical. Ohio State has to hope that they don't get beaten up in that game. If
Mhm.
they come out of that game healthy, that should be job one going into Oregon. And then they get a bye the next week. So
Right.
those two games, if they get through those unscathed and they go into the bye week, then it's Katie bar the door because I think they could have a really big finish.
I
If
agree.
they're
I agree.
healthy and they're undefeated, big finish for them.
Well, so okay, let's go ahead and end things on that. Let's talk about your publication again. Are you now? You mentioned that there were playoff choices. Did you and other folks do that, or is that one unified like playoff prediction?
We kind of voted. We took votes, and the teams that ended up as the top 11 are
Hmm.
the ones that made it. And then I think we were mostly unanimous on the group of five team. So then we just seeded them based on. I think two of us had Arizona winning the Big 12. Someone had Utah. Someone had Kansas State. So Arizona got two votes. So they're the Big 12 champion. So it was a concerted effort. And then as far as advancing, we also kind of voted, okay, in the semis, does Georgia beat Texas? Does Ohio State beat Oregon? So we kind of, there were four of us. We could have had a tie, but it was really three of us, the three writers, and
Hmm.
then the guy who did the graphics. Um, and so he was kind of the tiebreaker. If it, Anyway, it was a group effort, and we have it. It's on the very last page of the publication. We've got a bracket, and we've got them advancing through. And I'm not going to say what our choices are because
That's fine.
that
That's fine.
would spoil that would be the spoil the tease, so to speak,
Well,
in
you've
radio
teased
and
me
TV
enough
land.
to yeah, you've teased me enough to think that Ohio State Oregon can play three times. So
They could, they certainly
that's
could,
that's something that a college football fan never could have even thought of, even 15 to 20 years ago.
right?
Okay, let's run through how folks can get the publication yet again.
Again, they can go to, there is a link on my Twitter page. I put it up today because it did go live this morning. But if they are not following me on Twitter, I am at CFF Waxman. That's WACHSMAN, like it shows on the screen. And there's a link on my page. And also, if you go to cfbpod.com, there's a link there to order. And once you order, it'll give you the option you can download right away and you can start reading it and get your info and get ready for the college season, which starts August the 24th with
We're getting
week
closer and
zero.
closer.
With
Absolutely.
week zero.
CFBpod.com. Go check it
Yep.
out. Mike's been doing this for years. Even his Facebook followers get little nuggets throughout the season and off season, and it's always a
Equal
enjoying.
opportunity.
It's always an enjoying trip. I mean, one of the things I enjoy in that realm is not having the anger and things like that, but having some things we can respectfully kind of, hey, I don't see it that way, and
Right.
and the opinions and feeling like you're in a place where you can have a back and forth, and that's always been part of my relationship with you as far as online goes.
Well, yeah, and I try, and it's sometimes a real difficult to navigate Twitter because of
Yes,
that
yes,
vitriol and that they're so diametrically opposed with the way people respond to things. It is sometimes very difficult to bite your tongue on Twitter, but I think if you're a professional, you kind of have to.
yes.
But you're right, Facebook is a lot less confrontational because generally you know everybody.
Yep.
Whereas Twitter, people are following and you have no idea who some of these folks are. So, so yeah, they're both different. I think both of them have their pros and both have their cons. And it's nice to be able to go to one and feel comfortable, and the other, it's like, okay, what am I going to see today? I might need to be on my toes. So,
Yep, there might be a dumpster on fire just around the corner.
right.
Okay,
Mhm.
well, again, cfbpod.com. Go get the college football preview. Over 300 pages, you said, of
Yes.
data about college football. It's going to be an unprecedented season to this point. We know that for sure. And you can get up to date before it all starts in late August at cfbpod.com. Mike, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me, and I would love to come on again during the season.
All right, let's do it. Let's do it. Thank you.
All right.